Welcome to a new video on AlHuTV. Today for you, the MOVA LiDAX Ultra 2000 AWD. So the name already gives away a bit about it. That means, for one thing, we have a mirror mower here that's a bit larger in size. You can see it here. It's suitable for 2000 square meters. That's definitely impressive. The name AWD stands for all-wheel drive, which is what we have here. At the same time, we have a lot of cool features here. We have the UltraView 3.0 up front, a dual camera system located right here, a 3D LiDAR system here, this beautiful sphere that we also know. Here we have Ultra Trim 2.0, so you can see it very nicely here on the side. With that, it can shift the entire mowing unit outward. Underneath, there are essentially two mowing units. I'll show you briefly, with a cutting width of 40 centimeters. This way you can see it a bit. The same goes for the tires here. You can see them here. They are fully suspended. With this tire system, we can drive up slopes of up to 80%. Wow, so for large gardens, rough terrain and the like, it doesn't bother it at all. The whole thing is really very robust, and I got to test it. I also hopefully chose the right property for this. And you can see that here in my video. I'd say let's get started right away. We have a really cool design. MOVA has really managed to pull off a very cool look throughout the entire series. I just have to say that again. Otherwise, what's the best way to get started here? You plug it in and then it basically continues fully automatically. Here we have the option to use the automatic AI mapping and say, okay, it drives around the boundaries on its own. Alternatively, you can also operate the whole thing manually. You can choose how you want to do it here, however you prefer, especially if the garden is a bit more complex. In my case, I used it in a very large garden, which is also quite complex. On top of that, there are also narrow passages. So I decided to operate the whole thing manually. And I had to set up quite a few things here as well. So several paths and zones had to be created here. And in the end, I really managed to get everything set up perfectly here. We'll take another close look at everything in piece later. At the end, we'll look at the app again because there are a few things I want to go over. It really was quite extensive as far as the garden is concerned, but that's exactly what it's designed for. We have a very intelligent robot here, as I said, UltraView 3.0. We have the 3D ladder system here. You can imagine it in a somewhat simplified form. The ladder system is like a laser that measures distance and can recognize the shape of objects. The camera then determines what it actually is. This way we can recognize over 300 objects. And this also worked very well in my field test here. And so in the end, I want to get started right away. I'll just go ahead and start the process here because, as I said, I've chosen a very large property and had it run long lanes here. That really worked wonderfully. It went up and down here. Yes, you can watch it very comfortably. It works wonderfully here. It's not a big challenge now, but it has to be able to do that. And it does because it's designed for large gardens. Where things got a bit more interesting and the robot really had to prove itself was, as I said, here in the complex garden. Here, the paths I chose were very narrow, sometimes only slightly wider than the robot itself, but nevertheless, the robot had no trouble using and navigating all the paths here. It was able to reach everywhere. That was also very important to me with a garden like this, because often the bigger a garden gets and you have a residential house or such a beautiful house here, then of course you don't have such a simple run-of-the-mill garden. Most of the time it's a bit more complicated. And here too it worked wonderfully. The robot was able to reach everywhere and complete its tasks. Of course, I divided the whole thing into different zones. And you can also edit the zones again afterwards. For this, as I said, you don't have to create a new map to make adjustments. MOVA has solved this very cleverly. You can continue editing everything in the app. We'll take another look at that afterwards. Yes, since the navigation works so well, I'd like to pick up on that directly. Of course, I also did my IGL test here, because object recognition is one thing, but especially here, yes, IGL and the like should also be recognized. They should be detected. You could say here whether depending on the size, of course, it puts more focus on certain things. It focuses more on recognizing something here. In my example, it recognized the hedgehog without any problems. It also easily detected my frame here, even with my rather small grid bars. So it really always navigates perfectly through everything. Yes, and navigation is one thing, but drive is another. Here we have all-wheel drive. I have to come back to that again here. On this property, of course, we also had various slopes. I didn't actually measure them, even though it often looks a bit deceiving. They were actually quite steep. It never had any problems with its all-wheel drive, always went up and down here with ease, was able to turn perfectly, and then continued working. So that's also very important. Yes, and of course, with the Ultra Trim, this is the Ultra Trim 2.0 we're talking about. It's located here on the outside. The discs then move outward. That's a little special feature here, which allows you to get closer to the edge. You can here mow up to 5 centimeters from the edge. Of course, it's important here how close a wall is. In my case, the wall is relatively close. In that situation, you might not want it to go that close because you might have a garden where there isn't a wall, but instead there's a smooth transition between the lawn and maybe a walkway. There, you can even let it drive slightly over the edge. You can even set the cut in such a way that nothing or almost nothing is left standing here. So that's also possible. You always have to set that individually. That's not a problem either. Nevertheless, just the fact that it drives over here with the disc means that even less is left standing here. Yes, and then of course it does its job as it should in every situation. Here we have the option to set our lawn as needed. You can of course choose between 2 and 3 centimeters here. We have a very cool display here on the device, but of course we can control everything via the app. We can also set different cutting heights in the various zones here. Setting the heights here is no problem at all. Yes, and the tires here, as I said, the design is laid out in such a way that we have front wheel drive here, but also a side roller. So as I mentioned earlier, we can easily handle inclines, but turning is also made easier. Since this is now a fixed wheel, in the end nothing steers, so it can move the wheel over like this, which allows it to make a very nice turn. Yes, it looks nice, works wonderfully, so everything here has really been tip-top. So especially for large properties, you can really make good progress here. And as I said, even with mowing tasks, if you have to interrupt, it continues where it left off. For example, due to rain. Of course, it has a rain sensor, which is located here. By now, this works really, really well on all devices, on all lawnmowers. So it simply continues where it left off. The same applies when it needs to charge. So that's not an issue at all. What is very, very important to me here with such a large property, which I will show you in the app. These are the, no-go zones. It will get very complicated at some point here because there are hangers on here. We ultimately have no fall protection here. We have a kind of impact protection system here. It's installed here. Yes, it's a physical impact barrier. You can see it here. Yes, then it knows, okay, there's something in the way. Still here and there, I've set up the so-called no-go zones. Sometimes, if it slopes down a bit and it's still wet, yes, you might slide a little further over. That's really, really good because you can easily edit that in the app afterwards without any problems. And then it does its job just as you would expect. That's why I would say, let's switch over to the app for a moment, because I definitely have to show it to you. You definitely need it. It absolutely makes sense here. And especially if you have a garden of this size, there's always something that needs to be adjusted. Let's take a look at the app together here, and then we can already see the property. Yes, it's amazing what a massive and expansive property this is. But how incredibly challenging and difficult these corners are here as well. Here they are, how narrow they are. As you can already clearly see, there are many subtle hints everywhere that the robot constantly gives off. I specifically set up this restricted no-go zone right here, because the path goes straight down to the deep well in this area. Here we have a slope. Also here on the outside, I left a bit more space because it goes uphill here as well, so that it doesn't get stuck anywhere and slide down. So you can calmly edit everything here again, so that in the end you really achieve exactly what you have in mind. And here, of course, I placed some obstacles like the poles and the hedgehog. That is, of course, also shown here. It also immediately suggests, hey, I bumped into something here. Should I create a no-go zone here? It also recognized these trees. And you can then, wherever these trees were detected, basically on each side, I could then say, hey, watch out, there's a small no-go zone here. I'll put a little circle here so it just drives around it. So it does recognize it, but it also recognizes that there was something in the way here. And you can really see that it's truly wonderful. I've tried a lot here, which is why there are so many little markers you see here. You don't have to pay attention to them, but they're a small help and help you optimize your garden this way. So I think it's really, really good. And as I said, we have these large, which we also saw in the time lapse where it completed our work here. So it's really very nice. Now let's take a look together at what's called UltraView, our 3D LiDAR system. This is what it looks like when it creates this map. So that's really cool. Now I just have to see how to get this looking nice somehow. In terms of the rotation, you can now see very clearly here. You can really see again what we have here. The steps here also stand out, what we have here. And you can also see how complex and how large this garden is. That's really cool, this 3D map that it creates. As I said, it does this using this so-called 3D LiDAR system. And then you can, of course, take a really nice look at the whole thing. Here is the simplified view of what we have here. We also have another camera here. We can also set it up here so that we can run a patrol. We can also detect people here. This can also be set directly in the settings here. First, we come here and you can see the AI obstacle detection here. So animals, people, objects. What we have here is distance, how far it should drive past them. That worked really well here. Here, ultra trim, safe edge mowing, and so on and so forth. There are already quite a few settings you can adjust. The mowing height is now set for the entire garden here. If I want to continue here in customization mode, I can select the specific zones here. So I can set it up now, as you can already see. And I've also named everything just to make it look a bit nicer. And if I say here, look at the palm pavilion, I want it to be 9.5. I want to have a different mowing direction here. Yes. Then I set that specifically here for this pavilion. And all the other zones are still set to these 10 centimeters. Or just the way I want it. Of course, you can also set cross patterns and checkerboard patterns here as well. So that's one thing, of course. Now let's just reset everything here and select the general mode. I had it set the same everywhere. You can set it however you like. That's not an issue at all. So, and then here we have exactly all the, yes, I've already covered that now exactly. And general, that's where I wanted to go exactly. In the so-called consumables section, you can see how long the blades will last. As you know, rain protection, frost protection. So now in spring, if we still have frost, of course, here below 6 degrees here, the robot then doesn't start working. So everything is solved very cleverly. And here you can also continue after charging and so on and so forth. Nothing special. You could also take photos with the AI here. I actually did that with your predecessor model. Well, with the slightly smaller brothers, with the LiDAX 1200. That's right. I can show you that so you can see it for yourselves. In the end, you just take the picture here. In my case, it was a hedgehog. That works wonderfully as well. We can also turn on the light here. That's possible too, of course. The theft and so on and so forth. You know all of this, and it's really great. Super cool. The map is kept super easy. So now I'll get to what I actually wanted to show you. And this might be a bit, well, I mentioned it earlier, just how simple the whole thing is here, really. Now we have the map here in the area selection, and here we have the option to say, hey, look, I want to set up a restricted zone here. You can already see these red areas are already restricted zones, and I can continue editing them. But I can also, as you can see here by the pavilion, simply use this green line that I drew to divide the zone however I want, as many times as I like. I can actually create up to 150 zones here, and that's no problem at all. That's how easy the whole thing is. And that's important because with other robotic mowers, you often have to create a new map every time you make a change. But here you don't have to do that. That's basically all there is to say about the app. And it's kept relatively simple. Otherwise, it's really truly a cool robotic mower. Definitely suitable for large areas. So in a somewhat smaller garden, I think it's a bit too big. Here, 2,000 square meters. That's really impressive. I already have a really huge property here, and it only has just over 600 square meters of lawn area, and it could have handled much more. That's really a huge property. So we're really talking about those huge properties here. But as I said, if you have the space, then it's ideal. Definitely a good choice. Otherwise, of course, I can also recommend the smaller model, the LiDAX 1200, if you need something a bit smaller. It's also very compact. If you need something even smaller, as I said, MOVA has a solution for everything, but also for large gardens. So I hope I was able to give you some insight into that. What's also important, of course, is that it's IPX6, meaning it's waterproof. You can easily hose it down from below. That's absolutely no problem, in case anyone was wondering about that. All right, I hope I included everything for you. Otherwise, feel free to ask your questions, leave a comment, and you'll find everything else in the description. Any other important data that might be available, which I may have forgotten to mention, you can definitely look up, but also feel free to comment. It's absolutely no problem. And I hope I was able to give you a good insight into it. And yeah, feel free to leave a like, and a subscription would be super awesome too. And see you next time on AlHuTV.